Most people think speaking Spanish is enough to blend in anywhere. Dead wrong. There's a massive difference between textbook Spanish and street Cuban, and I learned this the hard way when someone tried to publicly shame me, not knowing I had a secret weapon they never saw coming. I never thought walking into an office building would feel like stepping into another country, but here I was on my first day at Rivera Marketing, feeling completely lost in my own city. Miami had always been home to me, but this downtown office might as well have been Mars. Rivera introduced himself with a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Within 5 minutes, I knew exactly what kind of boss he'd be. The whispered warnings from the receptionist should have been my first clue. "He's tough," she'd said, glancing around nervously, especially when he gets frustrated. What she didn't mention was how he'd switch to rapid-fire Spanish whenever something went wrong. And trust me, things went wrong a lot that first morning. The coffee machine broke down around 10, and I watched Mr. Rivera launch into what sounded like a passionate speech about incompetent maintenance crews. My coworkers nodded along, some chuckling at what I assumed were clever observations. I just stood there like a deer in headlights, clutching my empty mug. Then there was the printer incident. When it jammed for the third time, Mr. Rivera's voice rose as he gestured wildly at the machine, speaking entirely in Spanish to Maria from accounting. She nodded sympathetically while I pretended to understand by making appropriate facial expressions. Makes sense, right? Fake it till you make it. But here's the thing that really got to me. I wasn't just the outsider because I was new. In a city where most people grew up switching between languages like radio stations, I felt like I was stuck on one frequency while everyone else had access to the full spectrum. During lunch, I sat alone scrolling through my phone while conversations flowed around me in this beautiful musical Spanish that might as well have been code. The worst part wasn't feeling excluded, it was feeling like I was missing out on the real personality of this place. Every joke, every story, every moment of genuine connection seemed to happen in the language I couldn't access. Mr. Rivera walked past my desk that afternoon, speaking to another supervisor about weekend plans. They both laughed at something, and I caught Mr. Rivera glancing in my direction with this look that made my stomach twist. Not mean exactly, but dismissive, like I was furniture that happened to be taking up space. I kept thinking about my mom's warnings before I took this job. "Miami's different now, Mija," she'd said. "You need to be ready for anything." I'd brushed off her concerns, thinking I knew my own city. How wrong I was. The day dragged on with me feeling more invisible by the hour. Every Spanish conversation felt like a door slamming in my face, and Mr. Rivera's easy switch between languages started feeling less like natural bilingual flow and more like, well, something else entirely. Little did I know that tomorrow would bring a conversation that would change everything about how I saw this place and how they saw me. I knew something was coming. The way Mr. Rivera looked at me that first week, like I was some lost tourist who wandered into the wrong building. Well, maybe I was. But Tuesday morning changed everything, and honestly, I'm still not sure if I should laugh or cry about what happened. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to understand the filing system that made zero sense, when I heard Mr. Rivera talking to Carlos from accounting. They were standing maybe 10 feet away, and I could feel this weird energy in the air. You know that feeling when you're pretty sure someone's talking about you? Yeah, that was it. Then Mr. Rivera said it. In Spanish, obviously. "Mira, esta gringa no entiende nada." Probably thinks café con leche is some fancy Starbucks drink. He laughed at his own joke, and Carlos gave this uncomfortable chuckle that sounded more like a cough. The thing is, I understood every single word. Every single one. My face went hot and I could feel my hands getting sweaty on my keyboard. Part of me wanted to jump up and tell him exactly where he could stick his café con leche comment. But another part of me, the part that needed this job more than my pride needed defending, just sat there, frozen like a deer in headlights. Carlos kept glancing over at me, probably wondering if I caught any of it. The poor guy looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor tiles. Makes sense, right? Nobody wants to be standing there when their boss is being a complete jerk, especially when the target is sitting right there. But here's what really got to me. Mr. Rivera wasn't just making a joke. He was testing the waters, seeing how far he could push this whole Spanish thing. Like he was marking his territory or something. And the worst part, I was letting him do it. I kept typing, pretending to be busy with whatever meaningless spreadsheet was on my screen, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just about language anymore. This was about respect, about power, about who gets to feel comfortable in their own workplace. And right then, it definitely wasn't me. The office got quiet after that. Too quiet. You could practically hear everyone trying not to look in my direction while simultaneously trying to figure out if the new girl was about to have a meltdown. Sandra from HR walked by and gave me this sympathetic smile that somehow made everything worse. Well, Mr. Rivera thought he had me figured out. Thought he could make his little jokes and I'd just sit there taking it like some clueless outsider, but he had no idea what was coming. None of them did, actually. Because tomorrow morning, I was going to remind him why you should never assume anything about anyone, especially not about a girl who grew up listening to her abuela's stories in perfect Cuban Spanish every Sunday after church. I've always been good at hiding things. My poker face? Legendary. My secret stash of chocolate? Never discovered. But my biggest secret at work wasn't something I was trying to hide on purpose, it just never came up until now. Growing up in Hialeah was like living in a little piece of Cuba dropped right into South Florida. My abuela Carmen would drag me to the corner cafe every Saturday morning, where old men played dominoes and argued about politics in rapid-fire Spanish. Mija, you need to know your roots, she'd say. Switching between English and Cuban Spanish so fast it made my head spin. My abuelo Roberto was even worse. That man refused to speak English at home, claiming it was too boring for real conversation. The weird part is, most people assume you either speak Spanish or you don't. They never think about the different types. Cuban Spanish isn't your textbook Spanish from high school. We've got phrases that would make a Mexican person scratch their head. When my abuela called someone a come mierda, my Mexican friend Maria had no clue what that meant. Different countries, different slang. It's like the difference between British English and American English, but on steroids. At work, only 3 people knew about my Cuban background. Sandra from accounting, because she'd seen me at a Hialeah festival last year. Miguel from IT, because he caught me humming a Benny Moré song in the break room. And surprisingly, Janet from HR, who'd grown up in the same neighborhood as my cousin, but none of them really knew how fluent I was. They figured I might catch a word here and there, maybe order food in Spanish. They had no idea I could keep up with my abuelo's friends when they got into heated debates about baseball or politics. Miami's got the largest Cuban population outside of Cuba itself, over 400,000 people. You'd think that would make Cuban Spanish common knowledge around here, but most of my coworkers were from other parts of the country or spoke different types of Spanish entirely. My boss, Mr. Rivera, was from Colombia, and he probably assumed his jokes flew right over my head because I looked like just another gringa who stumbled into Miami for the beach weather. Then there's the assumption problem. People see my light skin and assume I'm monolingual. I can't count how many times I've been standing right there while someone made comments in Spanish thinking I was clueless. Usually, I just let it slide. Why create drama over small stuff? But something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way my coworkers shifted uncomfortably. Maybe it was the smirk on Mr. Rivera's face when he thought he'd gotten away with his little joke. I had 2 choices, keep pretending I didn't understand, or show him exactly what this gringa could do. The Cuban side of me, the side that learned to talk back from watching my abuela handle rude customers at her beauty salon, was itching for a fight. Time to see how Mr. Rivera handled a real Cuban comeback. I swear the whole office went dead silent for like 3 seconds. You know that feeling when you drop a bomb in conversation and everyone's brain just stops working? That's exactly what happened when I opened my mouth and let loose with some proper Cuban Spanish. Oye sir, no te hagas el loco conmigo rolled off my tongue like I'd been saving it up for weeks. Which honestly, I kind of had been. The phrase basically means, hey buddy, don't play dumb with me, but in that specific Cuban way that hits different. Not textbook Spanish, not Mexican telenovela Spanish. Pure Miami Cuban fire that my abuela used when she caught me sneaking cookies before dinner. Mr. Rivera's face went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds flat. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like he'd been caught stealing lunch money. His mouth actually dropped open a little bit, which would have been funnier if my heart wasn't pounding like I'd just run a marathon. The thing about Cuban Spanish is it's not just the words, it's the attitude, the rhythm, the way you tilt your head when you say certain phrases. When Cubans say nu, it's not just no, it's like a whole conversation wrapped up in one sound. I threw that in there too just to really drive the point home. My coworker, Sandra, the one who always pretends to be busy when awkward stuff happens, was staring at me like I just revealed I was secretly a superhero or something. Which, let's be real, Knowing Cuban slang in Miami kind of is a superpower when you think about it. But here's where it gets interesting. Mr. Rivera didn't get mad like I expected. Instead, he started laughing, not that fake office laugh people do when the boss makes a terrible joke, but genuine surprise laughter. The kind that happens when someone completely flips your expectations upside down. "Coño, I had no idea you spoke like this," he said, using a Cuban expression that basically means damn, but with more flavor. His whole posture changed too. The boss act dropped for a minute, and he seemed almost impressed, embarrassed, maybe both. The weird part is how quickly the entire mood shifted. One minute, I'm the quiet new girl who doesn't understand the office dynamics. The next minute, I'm apparently someone who can hold her own in Cuban Spanish banter. It's amazing how language can completely change how people see you, right? Sandra whispered something to Jake about how she never would have guessed I understood Spanish, let alone Cuban slang. Makes sense. I don't exactly look like what people expect when they think Cuban Spanish speaker, but that's Miami for you. Appearances fool you every single time. The air felt different after that moment, like something had shifted permanently in our little office ecosystem. Mr. Rivera kept glancing at me with this new expression I couldn't quite read, and I knew things were about to get very interesting around here. I swear I could see the exact moment Mr. Rivera's brain short-circuited. 1 second he was this confident guy who thought he owned the room, cracking jokes in Spanish like I was some clueless gringa who'd never understand. The next, his face turned this deep red color that reminded me of my abuela's sofrito when she'd let it cook too long. The silence in that office felt like it stretched forever. You know that feeling when you accidentally say something way too loud in a quiet restaurant? That's what this was, except I'd done it on purpose, and honestly, I wasn't sorry about it. Not even a little bit. Mr. Rivera kept opening his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closing it again. Makes sense, right? What do you say when someone completely flips the script on you? When the person you've been treating like they don't belong suddenly proves they understand every single word you've been throwing around. But here's the weird part. I could see something else happening behind his eyes. The embarrassment was obvious, sure, but there was something that looked almost like respect, maybe even a little fear. Scientists say embarrassment triggers real physical responses, sweating, increased heart rate, that whole fight or flight thing. Well, Mr. Rivera was definitely experiencing all of that in real time. Then there were my coworkers. Maria from accounting had her hand covering her mouth, trying not to smile. Carlos looked like he was watching the most entertaining telenovela episode of his life. And Jennifer? Poor Jennifer looked completely lost because she still had no idea what any of us had actually said, but she could feel the tension crackling through the air. What really got to me was watching Mr. Rivera try to recover his authority. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat a few times, and I could practically see him scrambling to figure out how to handle this situation. Because let's be real, this had never happened to him before. In his mind, he probably had all these employees neatly categorized, and I just completely destroyed his filing system. The power dynamic in that room shifted so fast it gave me whiplash. One moment I was the outsider who didn't fit in, the next I was the one holding all the cards. It's amazing how quickly things can change when people's assumptions get shattered like that. Mr. Rivera finally managed to stammer out something about getting back to work, but his voice had lost that cocky edge. He kept glancing at me like he was trying to solve some complicated puzzle, probably wondering what else he'd gotten wrong about me. And you know what? I wasn't done surprising people yet, because once word started spreading about what had happened in that conference room, everything was about to change again. The real question wasn't whether my coworkers would see me differently, it was whether they'd start treating me like the asset I'd always been, instead of the outsider they'd assumed I was. I honestly didn't expect what happened next. The morning after my little Cuban Spanish showdown with Mr. Rivera, I walked into the office, expecting maybe some awkward stares or whispered conversations behind my back. Instead, Maria from accounting practically ambushed me at the coffee machine. "Alicia, I heard you speaking Cuban yesterday with the boss," she said, eyes wide with excitement. "Can you tell me what que bala actually means? My boyfriend's Cuban and I never know if he's being sweet or sarcastic." Well, this was new territory for me. Here I was, suddenly the office translator for Cuban slang. Makes sense, right? In Miami, where over 65% of people speak Spanish at home, you'd think everyone would know these phrases. But Cuban Spanish? That's a whole different beast with its own secret code. Then there's Jessica from marketing, who cornered me during lunch break. My neighbor keeps saying Azir to me and I just smile and nod, she confessed, looking embarrassed. What does it even mean? I found myself explaining that Azir is basically buddy or friend. It's how Cubans greet each other. Nothing fancy, but hearing Jessica's face light up made me realize something weird was happening. The same colleagues who used to give me polite but distant smiles were now treating me like some kind of cultural bridge. But the real shift, Mr. Rivera himself started acting completely different around me. Gone were the under-the-breath Spanish comments meant to exclude. Instead, he'd walk past my desk and drop a casual "¿Qué tal, mi amor?", the kind of warm greeting you'd give family. The man who'd been trying to make me feel like an outsider was now pulling me into the inner circle. And the weird part is, I could see how this changed everything for everyone else too. Studies show that over 40% of US workers actually value cultural awareness in their teams, but I was watching it happen in real time. Suddenly, the office dynamics weren't about who spoke what language or who belonged where. People started asking me about Cuban culture, food recommendations, even pronunciation tips. The power structure that felt so rigid just days ago completely scrambled. Mr. Rivera, who used his Spanish like a weapon to maintain authority, now seemed genuinely interested in having actual conversations with me. Not the fake corporate small talk, but real discussions about Miami neighborhoods, Cuban coffee, family traditions. I won't lie, part of me felt vindicated. All those years of feeling like I had to hide my background or downplay my Cuban roots, and here I was becoming the go-to person for cultural insights. The girl who used to feel invisible in meetings was now getting invited to planning sessions where they wanted my perspective on reaching Spanish-speaking clients. Then again, I couldn't shake the feeling that this newfound respect came with its own complications. Being the Cuban expert felt good, sure, but it also meant carrying expectations I wasn't sure I wanted. What happens when your hidden talent becomes your defining characteristic at work? I have to admit, the change happened faster than I expected. One day, Mr. Rivera was making jokes about me in Spanish, thinking I was clueless, and the next, well, he started greeting me every morning with, "Oye, Sarah, ¿qué tal todo?" It felt surreal, honestly, like watching someone's entire personality flip overnight. The morning greetings became our thing. He'd walk past my desk around 8:15 sharp, coffee in hand, and drop some Cuban phrase that would make the other colleagues look up confused. "¿Tú andas en la lucha hoy?" he'd ask, checking if I was struggling with work. I'd fire back something like "Tranquilo, jefe, aquí andamos en la lucha pero echando pa'lante," basically telling him I was pushing through. The guy would actually smile. A real smile, not that fake boss smile we all know too well. But here's where it gets interesting. The other colleagues started approaching me during lunch breaks, asking what we were saying. Maria from accounting was the first. She'd been studying Spanish for 2 years, but couldn't understand half of what Mr. Rivera and I threw around. "What does Azirs even mean?" she asked, genuinely curious. I explained it's like saying buddy or friend, but specifically Cuban, not something you'd learn in textbook Spanish. Then there's the group lunch situation. Before I'd eat at my desk, scrolling through my phone like some antisocial hermit. Now, they actually invited me to join their table in the break room. Workplace experts always talk about using shared language for better team spirit, and honestly, they're onto something. When I taught them phrases like "está de madre," meaning something's awesome, they'd use it wrong but with such enthusiasm that I couldn't help laughing. The weird part is how Mr. Rivera's whole attitude shifted. Remember this guy who used to critique everything in Spanish behind people's backs? Now he'd ask my opinion on projects, sometimes switching between English and Cuban Spanish mid-sentence. "What do you think about this proposal, Alicia? ¿Tú crees que va a pegar?" I realized he wasn't just being inclusive, he actually valued my input more now. Studies show that respect can grow after initial conflict, and man, they weren't kidding. The tension from our first confrontation somehow transformed into mutual understanding. It's like we both realized we'd been playing this weird game of assumptions. He assumed I was just another monolingual American. I assumed he was just another condescending boss. The funniest moments came when I'd share Cuban expressions during meetings. When someone complained about a difficult client, I'd mutter, "Es tipo está más loco que una cabra," that guy's crazier than a goat. Mr. Rivera would burst out laughing while everyone else looked confused. Teams with diverse backgrounds report higher creativity and morale, and I was starting to see why firsthand. But you know what really surprised me? How much this whole experience was changing not just how others saw me, but how I saw myself. The confidence boost was undeniable. Though I had no idea that this newfound respect was about to create an entirely different kind of challenge, I never thought my little moment of speaking up would turn into office legend, but here we are. 3 months later and people are still talking about that day Alicia shut down Rivera with Cuban slang. Makes me cringe a little, honestly. I wasn't trying to shut anyone down, just tired of being the butt of jokes I supposedly couldn't understand. The weird part is how everything shifted after that, not just with Mr. Rivera, though his transformation was the most dramatic. The man went from making snide comments to asking me genuine questions about Cuban expressions he'd heard but never understood. Turns out his Spanish was more textbook than street, and he'd been faking some of his cultural confidence all along. Who would have guessed? But the real change happened with my coworkers. Sarah from accounting started asking me to help her practice Spanish for her weekend trips to Little Havana. Marcus admitted he'd always felt intimidated by the rapid-fire Spanish conversations during lunch breaks and thanked me for bridging that gap. Even the maintenance guy, Jorge, opened up about missing his hometown dialect after 20 years in Miami. Here's what nobody talks about, though. Standing up for yourself at work is terrifying, even when you're right. I spent weeks afterward wondering if I'd crossed some invisible line, if my boss would find subtle ways to make my life difficult. Instead, I got included in meetings I'd never been invited to before. My input on projects suddenly mattered. It's almost like speaking his language, literally and culturally, proved I belonged in ways my resume never could. Then there's the money thing, which feels shallow to mention, but let's be real here. During my next review, Mr. Rivera brought up my valuable cultural insights and communication skills that benefit the whole team. My raise wasn't huge, but it was something. Research backs this up too. Bilingual workers really do earn more, sometimes 20% higher salaries than their monolingual colleagues. The funniest part? Our office dynamics completely flipped. Instead of Spanish being this exclusive club I was locked out of, it became this bridge everyone wanted to cross. We started mixing languages naturally in meetings, explaining phrases to each other, laughing at translation mishaps instead of using them as weapons. Don't get me wrong, I still catch the occasional eye roll when I correct someone's pronunciation or explain why certain slang doesn't work in professional settings. Some people think I've gotten too comfortable since proving my language skills, but you know what? I'd rather be too comfortable than invisible. The story spread beyond our office too. Other departments heard about the shy girl who surprised everyone with perfect Cuban Spanish. HR even asked me to help with diversity training sessions, though I'm still not sure how I feel about being the poster child for hidden talents in the workplace. Looking back, that moment changed more than just how people saw me, it changed how I saw myself. Sometimes the thing you're most insecure about becomes your greatest strength. But what happens when that strength gets tested in ways you never expected?